first installment of a brand new series where I discuss the X-Men movies. With the release of New Mutants this weekend, and this also being the 20th anniversary of the series, I figured now's the perfect time to go through each movie and review them one by one, especially since New Mutants marks the end of an era, and X-Men will go on to become part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, for those of you who are new here, the idea for these series in the future, if they're related to a new release, is for them to lead up to the new film's release date, but New Mutants is playing in theaters only, and theaters by me are still shut down for the foreseeable future. Hopefully they'll give it an early VOD release or something, but we'll see. It looks like I'm definitely not seeing it though within the next month, so that gives me some time to finish this out and then review the movie at some point. Anyway, this is going to be comprised of the original trilogy, the 4 prequel movies, the 3 Wolverine movies, and the 2 Deadpool movies. When I finally get to New Mutants, I will do a review for that, along with a ranking of the entire series. So, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can catch more reviews as soon as they're out. But now, let's talk about the first film in the franchise, 2000's X-Men. The film establishes that mutants are pretty well known by this point, with Professor Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, running a school for younger mutants. However, Congress has introduced a new bill called the Mutant Registration Act, which would force mutants to reveal their identities and abilities. This causes Xavier and his team to clash with another group of mutants planning a violent retaliation, led by his old friend now known as Magneto, played by Ian McKellen, and recruited to Xavier's cause are 2 mutants who are still getting adjusted to their powers: Logan, also known as Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman, and Rogue, played by Anna Paquin. While superhero movies now are the biggest subgenre, this was out at a time when it was still considered somewhat risky to make them. Not that there weren't any good superhero movies before this, but there were a lot more notable misses than hits, and they weren't seen as the surefire moneymakers they are now. That conversation began to change with this movie. While there's still very much a comic book-like element to this, I mean, it is a movie about mutants with superpowers after all, this is the first instance of a somewhat more grounded approach to superhero movies, something taken one step further with the Dark Knight trilogy. The bright-colored spandex worn in the comics are not present here, and the color palette's pretty dark, letting you know this isn't going to be all glitz and glamour. But it's not a brooding dark. There are certainly levels of emotional intensity here, especially when it focuses on the trauma of both Rogue, as she's trying to get accustomed to her powers, as well as Wolverine, who experiences horrible flashes of the tests done on him in the past, which by the way makes them 2 of the best written characters in this film. But it never really felt depressing while watching it. And I've said this in my Dark Knight videos, but that's definitely something a lot of movies inspired by this and the Dark Knight trilogy got wrong. Because while this is serious, it's still a very exciting movie. Your emotions aren't limited to just feeling down all the time, and it's pretty fast paced. It's only an hour and 40 minutes, and while I know not every single superhero movie is 2 hours or more, it's still kind of shocking to see the ones that are under 2 hours, especially for a property as big as X-Men. But I think in this particular case, it's a totally different time, so it makes sense in retrospect. And it even establishes a great dynamic among all the X-Men. The film manages to have something of a sense of humor, mainly with the sarcastic banter between Wolverine and other characters, most notably Cyclops, played by James Marsden. It doesn't do it in a way that causes issues in tone though. It's not like the MCU movies where they'll stop everything so they can go out of their way to make a joke. It'll just be little quips here and there while in the middle of doing something else, and it's a good way to alleviate some of the tension while not downplaying the emotional stakes. But it finds a solid balance between character moments and some really well done action scenes. The fights are nicely choreographed, and even with the darker color palette, are still solid on a visual level. Probably my absolute favorite is a fight between Wolverine and Mystique, played by Rebecca Romijn, especially as she takes on the form of Wolverine and causes disorientation for both the audience as well as the other mutants trying to help. The movie didn't have the budget that superhero movies now have and are almost immediately rewarded upon announcement. It was actually under $100 million, which is still a lot to be clear, because they managed to do plenty with this and give us some really thrilling action scenes, and some can be brutal too. There's a scene early on where Wolverine's having a nightmare and Rogue checks on him and he stabs her as a reflex when he wakes up. That was like traumatizing to me when I saw it as a kid, and even seeing it now, it's actually still pretty unsettling to see, especially in the aftermath when she touches him to heal herself and you see the life starting to drain from him. That's kind of frightening. While not every scene was this graphic, borderline R-rated moment, it did indicate that superhero movies don't necessarily have to be only full of glossy, cool-looking moments. There can be some real intense scenes like that as well. But a big defining feature of X-Men from the comics is its social commentary, which translated well here. X-Men provided a look at discrimination and having to live in fear of that discrimination, and that's especially seen through the potential passing of the Mutant Registration Act and the fear-mongering that's used by the politicians to make their case. And that's a big thing that fuels Magneto, who once had to live in fear due to being in concentration camps when he was younger. And having to live his life in fear again isn't going to sit well with him, which is why he takes such drastic action and tries to stage this violent rebellion. And that's what makes him such such a compelling villain. Along with Rogue and Wolverine, Magneto is one of the best written characters here, and Ian McKellen's performance is phenomenal. You can feel the tension with every line he speaks. He likes toying with people he clashes with, he smugly talks down to them when he knows he has the upper hand, and you still get this clear sense that he's menacing, especially as he's not someone who makes empty threats. He shows no hesitation when he's backed into a corner, and you can clearly get that he's someone you don't want to take lightly. The fact it's expressed so well shows this is just some top-notch acting from McKellen. All the acting in general is great, actually. Patrick Stewart is spot-on casting as Xavier, while James Marsden as Cyclops was a lot of fun, Halle Berry as Storm was excellent, Famke Janssen did a great job as Jean Grey, and Anna Paquin gives probably one of her best performances as Rogue. Then of course there's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, who along with McKellen is one of the biggest standouts in terms of the acting. He was unknown at the time, and I didn't fully realize this then because I was so young when I saw it, but there was a lot of skepticism surrounding him. He was mostly a theater actor and only had 2 low-budget Australian films to his name. So for him to take on one of the most iconic superheroes, it was met with a lot of uncertainty. But he knocks it out of the park here. Wolverine was always known as the badass X-Men, and Jackman brought that to life perfectly. His delivery made him seem cool, the sarcasm was hilarious, he shines in all of his action scenes, and he still brings out the nuance from his troubled history to make him an intriguing, compelling protagonist. Honestly, I don't think anyone will truly ever be able to top him as this character. Now, I do have some criticisms, nothing that totally derailed the experience, but still worth noting. Unlike a lot of other superhero movies, this isn't so much of an origin story. Like I said, mutants are well known at the start of the movie, and I'm glad they did that, but because we're being introduced to so many characters at once, and this is only an hour and 40-minute movie, unfortunately some characters aren't as developed here. Like I said, Rogue and Wolverine are 2 of the best written characters, and that's followed by Magneto and then Xavier. Everyone else though gets their moments here and there, but none of them really have an arc. I guess Cyclops kinda sorta has some of the best character moments among the remaining X-Men, and it's mainly for his banter with Wolverine, but everyone on the team has a few moments here and there where they shine, so it's not too bad. I just say they're another cool aspect of the team rather than truly compelling in their own right. My issue is even more so with the villains. Magneto's great, but everyone else, not so much. Mystique has some of the best fights in the movie, but I wouldn't call her a totally interesting villain. I'd say she's just another member of Magneto's group. She's mostly pretty quiet whenever she's not impersonating another character, so you don't learn much about her. Meanwhile, you have Toad and Sabretooth, and there's a couple of cool fights they have, but they're a bit underwhelming otherwise. They're present, and they're almost always by Magneto's side, but that's about the most I can say for them. I never read the comics, but I know how big of a rivalry Sabretooth and Wolverine had, and we get almost none of that here. He's just another mostly silent lackey. They tried making up for this with Origins, which we'll get to that, but the way he's handled here is disappointing. Also, in a way, for such a big build-up between the mutants and the Brotherhood, Magneto's group, the showdown at the end feels a little small-scale in a way. Even though a sequel wasn't greenlit until after this movie's success, in a way, the last act felt more like they were looking at setting up the next movie in case they got the go-ahead, rather than really wrapping up this story. Maybe it's just because we're spoiled now with how big and dramatic final fights are in superhero movies, but it just felt like it had this mindset of, hey, we're at the end of the movie, but the real fight is in the next movie that we're not even sure is going to happen. It's a lot of one-on-one fights that feel somewhat isolated rather than this truly explosive finale, but it also could be they were only able to do so much. I take into account it was a totally different time, but it's something worth noting. This was a big risk at the time, but it paid off. It may not be a perfect movie, but it's funny, it's exciting, it's got a compelling story, plenty of social commentary, and a lot of great performances, especially from Hugh Jackman and Ian McKellen. And it paved the way for superhero movies to be what they are today. 20 years later, it still holds up and is still an absolute blast to watch. X-Men gets an 8.5 out of 10. Up next is X2, probably the most popular of the original trilogy. It really overshadowed this movie, to be honest. I feel like people talk about that more than this, so it'll be fun to talk about that, see how that holds up. I'll have that review out later this week, along with more 2020 reviews coming soon. So let me know, did you see X-Men, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Does it still hold up all these years later, and who's your favorite X-Men? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.